I got so excited about getting up here, I didn't even introduce myself. I am Mindy McLuhan, President and CEO of Loveland Chamber. And I was so excited because I could actually see our presenters here today, because I had a dream at 2:30 this morning that they were not here because traffic on I-25, and it was going to create havoc for me to have to introduce something that was not here to present. So there you have it. I am going to introduce Brandon Schaefer from OEdit and Diane Barrett from CTIO. So come on up.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Brandon Schaefer. I'm a special advisor for passenger rail and transit at the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And this is my friend and colleague, Diane Barrett, who I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Oh, he's going to make me do it myself. My name is Diane Barrett, and I'm a special advisor to the governor for the Front Range Passenger Rail Project. The goal of that project is, as you all probably know, to bring together the agencies in the state that need to be able to work together. It's kind of hard to put a passenger rail system together and start service, and it's pretty difficult to find any one agency that can do it by itself. Primarily financial reasons, but others as well. And so what we're trying to do is make the most of what each of those agencies has in terms of authority, in terms of financing, and put them all together in order to achieve greater things with a larger amount of money and expertise and capacity. So that's where we are today. And Brandon and I have, Brandon has just made a whole new slide deck. So you get to help us start out. We've had obviously a great one going forward, but we have made some changes. We've been working hard and achieving things. And so the new slide deck is up to date and accurate. So take it away, Brandon.
Thank you. We'll kind of just go over, this is what we'll talk about, just some baseline assumptions to kind of gear this, ground the conversation so that everyone's on the same page of what we know. We'll kind of go through where joint service started, kind of the origin story of Fast Tracks and where we're at today, and then really dive into what joint service is and dive into what each entity has to offer to deliver passenger rail service here to Northern Colorado and the Front Range here. So first, a couple assumptions that we need to start with, first and foremost, is that no single agency or district alone can deliver on Front Range passenger rail by themselves. So Front Range Passenger Rail District cannot do it alone, RTD cannot contribute and do it alone, and neither can CDOT do this alone either. And so it's going to take joint collaboration amongst all of the three leading transit agencies and districts to provide service for joint service. The other one is that we know that RTD alone cannot deliver on the B line, which is the original Denver Union Station to Longmont alone, and that if they were to do it solo, it would take nearly almost to 2050, and this is from their own studies and their own research that says they would not be able to do this until another 25 years. And so that's another key thing of driving together the collaboration needed to deliver on joint service and passenger rail here in the Northern Front Range. Each entity has their own special tools and capabilities to deliver on Front Range passenger rail, which is why we want to bring them all together and where joint service originated from. And so bringing each of their talents, each of their expertise, and bringing them into the same room, talking to each other for the first time in a very long time, all three of them together, is really critical to delivering passenger rail service here along the Front Range and in Northern Colorado first. The other thing to know, and assumption that we do have, is that joint service is going to be a hybrid operation. So Front Range Passenger Rail District, which we'll show you the map, they already have station site selected, they have a route selected, and RTD also has station site selected for their old B line. Joint service will be a hybrid of the two services offered by both agencies and both districts, and that's why we have to be in the room together as well. The other one is just, on the state side, is just ensuring that this is seamlessly embedded into the statewide transit system as well. So from the CDOT perspective, ensuring that passenger rail service is embedded to make sure that the train station aligns with the bus schedule is also really critical. And so delivery on passenger rail can't just be one entity alone, and that's why we need all three speaking to each other and collaborating on joint service together. Where did we get here? So almost 20 years ago, Fast Tracks and RTD went to the ballot to approve an expanded transit service called Fast Tracks. Since then, the cost of delivering the old B line from Denver Union Station to Longmont was initially 55 trains a day, triple tracking the line, and that just is not feasible. If you're going to triple track the line, one of the rules of thumb in railroad is you might as well go ahead and just buy the entire railroad and operate it on your own by that point. So that's why we don't have the old B line, and part of the reason why we're here today is to ensure that we can bring that service to fruition. Fast forward to 2021, the state legislature created the Front Range Passenger Rail District, and that was done by then Senate President Leroy Garcia. And in that statutory language, it authorized and mandated that the northern segment of Front Range Passenger Rail had to be completed first. First and foremost, the reasoning for that is that one, and the biggest one, is that the voters already approved a sales tax and have been paying into a system that they do not have service for. So delivering on joint service and delivering on Northern Front Range is critical to instilling trust in the voters before going to the ballot for Front Range Passenger Rail District and asking the entirety of the line to support a sales tax increase on this service. At the end of 2023, so just at the end of last year, the Front Range Passenger Rail District was accepted into what's called the Corridor ID program. So the federal government okayed the route. They said, we like all of the station sites that you've selected, and we like your route. And we also like the northern segment from Denver Union Station to Boulder to Longmont to Loveland and Fort Collins as the first phase of the build out of this. What's really exciting is that Front Range Passenger Rail is one of 2 corridors in the country to be in phase 2 of the Corridor ID program. So we have federal interest in this. We have federal dollars that came down to the district, about $500,000, and we will actually be in a planning process with the federal government and the Department of Transportation for this project, which is really exciting. In 2024, and early this, I think February of this year, both RTD and CTIO, CDOT, and Front Range Passenger Rail District came together and released what's called a white paper on joint service, basically saying we can deliver this service if all 3 of us work together, because that's how other corridors across the country have come online faster than just one single agency can produce. And so starting at the end of last year and then into this year, they've already begun saying we can deliver on this, and the white paper is there saying here's the map of how we can deliver service. Also in the legislature this session, we passed 184, which is a congestion impact fee to fund multimodal projects here in the state, providing a dedicated revenue stream for multimodal here and that we can use for passenger rail. In that statute as well, also authorized RTD, Front Range Passenger Rail, and CDOT to have joint service authority to kind of pool all of their resources together to come and deliver on passenger rail service here. And then over the summer, after the bill signing in May, beginning in July and August, all 3 entities met together to begin mapping out what they can do on Front Range Passenger Rail service and delivered their first report already to the legislature detailing what we do know today at the end of September, which is really exciting. So a lot of work has already begun on this. So I'm sure you all are curious, what is joint service? It's a really funky concept, but right now joint service is in its planning phase. And so there is no service starting today. All 3 entities are just speaking to each other, but what you need to know is that primarily it's just a process to accelerate the timeline of delivery of this service. If we waited, for example, until Front Range Passenger Rail District was ready to go to the ballot and then collect sales tax revenue to implement this, we would be waiting until they went to the ballot in 26, 28, whenever the board decided to go to the ballot box. This accelerates that timeline and brings all 3 entities together to begin on this process. It also reduces the cost of delivering service. So if we can bring all 3 agencies together, they all have their own revenue streams to deliver on this, which is exciting as well. And then the last is just collaboration amongst the 3 as well. We'll keep on going here. Just an overview of our transportation organizations here. So this, after we did a round of stakeholder engagement, we did a really detailed PowerPoint and we got glossy eyes going over all the legislative requirements, which is this new deck to kind of go through to show folks in a more clear and concise way what's going on here. CDOT is responsible for all of Colorado's transportation network. They're responsible for making sure our roads and highways are doing well and making sure that integration amongst all travel modes and transportation modes are integrated into the statewide system. We have FRPR, which was created in 21, and their really mission is to plan, design, finance, construct, maintain, and operate Front Range Passenger Rail on its own. The other unique thing that FRPR brings to the table is that they have a board that can refer a ballot measure and have taxing authority to do that mechanism by themselves. CDOT does not have that ability, but FRPR does. RTD, on the other hand, just operates a mass transit system in the Denver metro area, coming all the way up to Longmont, and then the district boundary concludes in Longmont. But they have a funding mechanism and a funding stream just for fast tracks alone. So they have also money to bring to the table as well, which is where we get to where joint service is at right here in the middle. Joint service, I don't know, Diane, if you want to speak to this part, or I can keep on going. You keep going, okay. In the middle here, this kind of illustrates for you all where joint service lives. It's going to be a hybrid of all three agencies working together, but really what we can offer with joint service is financing options. So the CDOT has the creative financing arm, the Colorado Transportation Investment Office. And then we also have the ability to tap into fast track sales tax revenue, and then also legislative revenue sources from SB 184, which was the congestion impact fee, and then SB 230, which is an oil and gas revenue source that we can also tap for transportation projects here. Combined, just those two Senate bills alone, Colorado, starting in 2026, will almost bring in $200 million annually to invest in the state's transit system here across Colorado, which is really exciting. The other thing that joint service brings is we have technical analyses, reports, service development plans, research reports that each entity has already completed on passenger rail or the B-line and fast tracks. So we are bringing all of their existing reports into one work stream to tap from and take information as well. I would say the other thing that each entity has is technical experience with procurement, negotiations with contracts, and then expertise in operations and enterprise management. And so if we can get all three working, this is what joint service brings to the table for all of us here. And then also just access to an understanding of funding mechanisms.
We might stop here for questions.
I'll take a brief pause. Are there any questions from the audience so far on the content before we move forward, or do we want to hold until the end? Because we can answer Q&A.
Everybody knows what CTIO is? Or doesn't care? Just kidding.
All right, we'll keep.
You want to tell them?
We'll keep. Yeah.
I think we should share. Literally, does everybody really know what CTIO is? Okay. CTIO is an investment enterprise, which means that paper provisions don't necessarily apply to them because they don't use primarily or even majorly state money. Okay?
Thanks, Diane. All right, moving along here as well is how are the entities working together? Diane is the project manager of joint service here, and she has three different committees that have staff and the principals from each of these agencies working together already to begin on joint service. So there's a funding and finance committee, there's a governance committee, really making sure that we know how these decisions will be made across all three entities. And then we also have an operations committee to kind of ensure and look at station sites and make sure that there's service, that it makes sense that there's bus connectivity and that it connects into the local transit system as well. Each of these entities are already at the table. And then in 184, there were three different ways that we could kind of construct and move forward through this. The first one being, should we look at a new legal entity such as the Colorado Rail Authority? That does not exist right now. So for example, CDOT can help with roads and highways. RTD can maintain the commuter rail service that they have in the bus system in the Denver metro area, but should we have a rail authority since we're going to have passenger rail service here in Colorado? That was one of the questions that came up in the legislative session in 2024 and kind of directed these three agencies to look at answering. We also had the ability to look at an independent corporate entity as well, or we could look at and enter into intergovernmental agreements. The spoiler here is that the working group is looking at IGAs, or a series of them, to enter into service and really start making decisions and moving this project into its first phase, which is exciting. And so that report at the end of September outlined that they're going to look at IGAs, and the decisions are actively in formation right now, in draft right now. That's where we're at with this. And then some basic joint service assumptions. I'm going to take my time going through this one. I think we have plenty of time to go through this. Are a few things that we want to run you through. So joint service is kind of making the assumption, and we talked to a lot of stakeholders about this, is that we want one operator running the entire line. We do not want RTD, we don't want Amtrak or another rail entity all on the same track running service. That just makes it more difficult to run service first and foremost. So just having one operator is foundational. The other is just one access agreement with BNSF. BNSF is the railroad that owns and operates the rail line north of Westminster all the way up to Fort Collins and beyond. And so ensuring that we just have one access agreement with them and that they're not holding access agreements with RTD, Front Range Passenger Rail, Amtrak as well. We just want to make sure that there's one because it just makes it easier to streamline this entire project. The other is just one route. We do not want to lay double or triple tracks like the original Fast Tracks provision envisioned. It's really, really expensive. That's why that project never really came to fruition. And so ensuring that we're just using the same line and that we can access BNSF's freight rail line is also what we're looking for. When we look at the financing as well, this kind of lays out a very basic financing stack, although it's very complicated behind the scenes of how to get all this into one project. But we're looking at RTD's Fast Track sales tax revenue. They bring in sales tax specifically for the B line, and so we can access that and have to work with their general manager and their board to access those funds and what that might look like and what they would appropriate. We're going to look at the congestion impact fee that the state will come online in 2025. Look at the oil and gas revenue. That's about $20 million, I think, annually, just for rail projects here in Colorado specifically. And then also look at the bipartisan infrastructure law, because there are federal funds that Congress advanced appropriations until 2026 just for passenger rail service. So even though there is a change in administration, there are federal funds available for states to access through 2026 that we can draw down to Colorado and reduce the cost, making it a lot cheaper that when and if RTD or FRPR were to go to the ballot, we can ask Coloradans to vote for the lowest possible sales tax increase to fund passenger rail service up and down the entire corridor. We'll also look at local funding sources, so different municipalities contributing different money stacks for their stations and their service. And then also looking at fare box collections, i.e. just like tickets, how much those cost. And then also looking at the federal RIF program, which is a really innovative financing mechanism at the federal government level that we can access as well to fund passenger rail service here in Colorado, which is really exciting. On the governance side, since all three entities are working together and all is different government agencies, this does not add to, modify, or decrease their existing authorities at all. This just brings, again, their strengths to the table to deliver on this project, and also just shares those powers as well. And so the governance model that we're kind of looking at is just representation of those contributing entities to service. So again, that's CTIO through CDOT, FRPR, and then also RTD as well. All right, keep on going, and I think we're wrapping up here. A few things to know about FRPR. This is a really exciting, this is Colorado's probably largest infrastructure project in a long time. FRPR is the district that would span passenger rail service from Fort Collins all the way down to Pueblo, and then eventually heading down to Trinidad. What's exciting about this is that it would connect not only Colorado, but in future years connect us to Wyoming and connect us down into Mexico as well when those state governments have their own passenger rail service. And this is also envisioned by the Department of Transportation's long-term vision for passenger rail service and across the country. The Front Range Passenger Rail District, if we go from Denver north, we already have these 5 stations that have been approved by the FRA and are already under consideration and study. So at most, we already know that there will be service from Denver all the way to Fort Collins, which is really exciting. The hybrid service of joint service that kind of overlays with RTD is both Denver and then Boulder and then Longmont as well. But when we're looking at starting the first phase of Front Range Passenger Rail, we need to also look at what were the other stops along the initial B line from RTD's jurisdiction, which was Westminster, Broomfield, and Louisville. Those questions we have to go back to the FRA and say, which of these can we do? Can we do all 3? Would you let us do all 3 and maintain intercity classification? Or should we only select 2 of these to maintain intercity passenger rail? Intercity just allows us to operate and access more federal funds to bring down from the federal government. And commuter rail is just what you would see in Denver, for example, going from the Denver Union Station out to the airport, the A line. This is some of the station considerations that we're having to make. And then from Denver south, this is also going to be another project, probably phase 2 of Front Range Passenger Rail. But for now, just because we have statutory requirements, we have to look to the north first to deliver service, which is really exciting. On a phase 1 build out here, so what do we know and what are we kind of operating and what information do we have today on this service? Right now, RTD just released back in September of this year and presented at their board meeting in September was the peak service feasibility study. This examined RTD went back to the district, went back to to their communities and asked what would a hybrid new updated service look like for the old B line. They came back and said for 3 trips, 3 inbound and 3 outbound trains from Denver to Longmont, they're looking at what's called peak service. This would be an AM trips that they would offer and PM trips as well. This allowed us to actually look at what their study said with BNSF and others for a 30% build out. So we were able to look at their report and kind of have an estimation of the cost that they're looking at, look at the capital and maintenance and operations costs that they also projected, and kind of draw from that and have confidence in what they were able to report. And so from this, we know that just this alone, peak service, was estimated about $650 million. Almost half of that, though, is just for capital improvements. I'll spoil it here. What good news on capital improvements is that the state has already basically been able to lay down almost a third of that money through the federal government from IIJA. We just received a $66 million award to the state to improve positive train control. Basically, a fancy way of saying there's a new signaling system coming. There are new sidings, which is basically a pull-off zone for different trains that are operating at the same time. And this is really exciting because this pays down almost $93 million of that 320, which is exciting. So there are already efforts underway to improve the rail line. That way we can have passenger rail service on there. That's already come into fruition. In January, we are also going to look, the state will receive modeling data to say what would 3 round trips look like per day from Denver Union Station all the way up to Loveland and Fort Collins, and what would 5 daily round trips look like. That modeling was required by 184, which was the congestion impact fee bill, and that will come back to us in January or February of next year. And so we'll have even more data to look at and more cost estimates to look at of what the first phase would cost. And then again, awarded that CRISI grant, which came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law as well. That, I think, we have one last one, and we'll turn it over to questions, is accountability. A lot of voters within the RTD district boundaries have a lot of questions of when they're going to see service. For example, if we were to go to and have the Broomfield mayor with us, Joan Peck of Longmont with us, and the Boulder mayor, they would all kind of be like, we've been paying into this service for so long, but haven't seen it happen. So is there actual, you're telling us that joint service will come, you're telling us that Front Range Passenger Rail is coming, but is it really coming? The answer is yes. One of the core principles of 184 was really making sure that there was accountability across all of these agencies to make sure that they are delivering on this and that there's a real tangible plan to deliver this service. Northern Colorado here, Loveland, Fort Collins is expanding rapidly. We can't wait till 2050 to have service. We can't wait until 2040 to have service. People want it now, and they want safe options now. This kind of lays out what we're driving towards. So already at the end of September, there was a report that was turned into the legislature just summarizing, here's information that we already know, here's what we're kind of operating off of, and here are the next steps. Q1 of 25, which Diane has the lovely task of helping us with, is getting all of these intergovernmental agreements drafted, signed, and executed and approved by necessary and related boards. That's to be determined, the governance structure of joint service. And then by March 1st of this year, with all of the new modeling, all of the financial modeling that we're going to get back, we will then report back to the legislature what the service plan is going to look like. This is going to come in the middle of the legislative session. It's going to identify if we need new additional state revenue sources, and it's also going to just lay out what the plan is to deliver service no later than January 1st of 2029. Should service not begin by then, the governor signed into the bill that RTD, Fast Track, and FRPR need to provide a 6-month report every 6 months that service has not been initiated starting in 2029. So they've laid down a clear marker of saying service will start by this date. If it doesn't, every 6 months we want a report of why and where you're at with delivering the service. The last part here, and this is probably really helpful for our Denver Metro community, but especially Longmont here, is that RTD has to also submit to the governor and submit to the legislature what their plan is to actually complete their entire Fast Tracks program. Again, this was voted on by voters 20 years ago. Some of the lines they have put on, and on our certain service, the A line is an example. Part of the B line is in service that goes to Westminster, but they also have to report back to the legislature what their plan is to actually complete all of this. And then also going into Northern Colorado is the N line that goes from Denver all the way up to, I think, 164th in Eastlake. And so there's also accountability coming from RTD as well. So we're driving towards getting this done with some very tight timelines that is not sometimes fun to have to stare down the barrel of, but we're making progress. Some just key takeaways for you all is that we are all collaboratively working together. All three principals, Executive Director Shoshana Liu, General Manager Deborah Johnson, the Front Range Passenger Rail District Board Chair, and leadership there is also at the table delivering this service and working together. And that this is really, if we are able to do this, it's going to be joint service. It's going to be a joint hybrid of the service that we're looking at. And then also just to meet our state climate goals, our transit options, and increasing all of that will just help provide more multimodal options for folks to access and take from Denver all the way up here and Loveland and Fort Collins all the way back down. And is saving Coloradans time and money. No one wants to be on I-25 with construction. It's dangerous sometimes, and we want to just make sure that we have a safer transportation option that we can deliver on for the Front Range. The other takeaway here as well is that we've been meeting with stakeholders along the route, so Larimer County commissioners we've been meeting with, mayors we've been meeting with along the corridor to bring them up to speed on what this plan looks like. All the feedback has been positive. They're also waiting, much like probably a lot of you, with bated breath to actually see what comes of this, but there is a lot of renewed hope in delivering passenger rail service here to Northern Colorado and wrap this up. With that, we have a couple minutes, I think 3, to take any questions from the audience. If there are any, yeah.
So talk a little bit more about how local communities are going to make this work, since Denver is the only community with a rail station. So, obviously a lot of planning and cost is going into the rail service itself, but how does this become successful if we're not also contributing money to this local communities?
That's right. One of the things that we're looking at is, for example, if we were to go talk to Mayor Peck of Longmont, they will say, and they've kind of built their downtown around eventual train service because they voted into it 20 years ago. So they've rezoned their land. They are creating development around a train station. And when we look to Loveland, Fort Collins, we're also beginning early conversations of saying, where would you like your train station site? And FRPR, the district itself, is also working with local partners to say, where would you like it? Are you ready for train service? And what would you need from us? Once FRPRD goes to the ballot and is able to pass and has revenue, they can also support in the train station development sites, should they choose. And then locals can also provide a match. For example, on some transportation projects, the state will provide the platform, a ticketing station, and a few other key amenities. If you wanted, for example, a coffee shop, sandwiches, any of that, the locals would have to come together and say, here's our local contribution to make our train station site, I don't know, something like a mini Denver Union Station, if that's what you choose, to ensure that we have all the services that we want there. The other part of this too is that as we think about housing and increasing housing development across the Front Range, is making sure that's also tied into where transit is at as well, if that helps answer your question. From a high level, that's what we're looking at. Yeah, please.
So I have a lot of questions. They're all about money, but I'll try to combine it into one. So as you're looking at this capital stack, and you're going to the ballot to create a taxing entity to help finance this, I want to go back to some of your initial comments about RTD. And RTD has had some significant financial problems. And so with your capital stack, your projections, my understanding is RTD, the budget, a very small percentage comes from ridership. So in your equations, how much of this entire project, which I think everyone's rooting for in some fashion, how much of it is ridership going to be managing the day-to-day budget of this in the future versus government subsidy?
You want to do it? There you go.
It's a really good question. And it's a kind of a frustrating answer because if you talk to rail authorities and other agencies that have to do with rail transit, they will all tell you that fare box revenue is not a substantial portion of what they can rely upon to do particularly capital projects and even regular operations and maintenance. I think that I've heard bandied about less than 20% generally on it. I can't tell you exactly what RTD is today, but it is exactly that. I mean, fare box collection is not relied upon. there are efforts that, that I've been watching carefully that have to do with trying to change that, but a lot of things would have to change in order to make it change. For instance, ridership versus boarding. How do you count? Who's getting on, who's getting off, how many times the same person getting on and off? How do you actually count that, and how do you actually count that in terms of fares? There are some things like that that are a bit tricky, but guess what? We put man on them, right? And I don't think it's brain, but I haven't seen enough real effort to change that yet, and I hope that we can. I hope that we will kind of begin to understand that we can't keep relying on federal government, probably in the next 4 years. And so we are, it's time to start paying a whole lot more attention to fare box.
All right, I think that concludes our presentation. Thanks so much, y'all.
That's it.
Yeah.